Here we go. Hello, everybody. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I run comms for Library Juice Academy and Library Juice Press and all the other things that we have going on. And I'm so happy to welcome everyone to today's webinar. We are going to be talking about open education for librarians. And I cannot wait to pass it off to our wonderful host, Quill and Colleen. And to get us there, let me just step through a couple of slides. I just wanted to tell you all about Library Juice Academy. We offer a range of online professional development courses for librarians and staff and all of us in the library and information studies ecosystem. We tend to focus on practical issues, help you build new skills as we all discover along the way that there are other things that we need to know, which happens to some of us all the time. Our classes are asynchronous, usually over a 4-week period. We think of them as ideal for upscaling support staff when needed, or earning certificates for those of us who work for institutions that value those. We have institutional bundle pricing, and we think of ourselves as an affordable alternative to conference attendance, among other things. So I do encourage you to check us out at libraryjuiceacademy.com. Our sister organization is Library Juice Press, and through that we publish books and journals that examine theoretical and practical issues in librarianship, primarily from a critical perspective. Again, for an audience of professional librarians, students of library science, and others of us in that sphere. Library Juice Press is an imprint of Litwin Books, so you can learn more about us at litwinbooks.com. And I would encourage you to find us on all the places that you like to scroll. We are there as Library Juice Academy. Our sister organizations are there as well. We are on Facebook and Instagram and Mastodon and Blue Sky. So yeah, say hello, take a look. We have a lot of great things happening all the time, and I hope you'll keep up. That is everything I wanted to say. This is my favorite part where I get to stop talking, hand it over to the wonderful host. Thank you both.
Thanks, Sophie. So
Thank you,
I'll go
Sophie.
ahead and get us rolling.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. And thank you, Sophie. My name is Quill, and I'm an open education advocate. I've been doing this for about 15 years. I've worked in 2 colleges to start and maintain open education projects, where I think throughout my career, I've probably recorded textbook savings of over $3 million at this point. Although don't quote me on that because I don't actually know the number anymore. And Colleen is here to present with me, and I'd like her to introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Colleen Sanders. I've been working in open education spaces as a librarian, instructional designer, and faculty developer for about a decade here in the Pacific Northwest. Quill and I design and teach the Open Education Certificate program at Library Juice, which we'll talk about more shortly.
So we want to make sure that you kind of have a sense of what's happening. Please feel free to use the chat to talk to each other. We're not monitoring chat, but if you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A because we will check that. We may not answer questions till the end because we both get caught up in our topic and forget to look at stuff, but we will definitely respond to questions at the end. And the slides are available. We're making them available to everyone. We also have a Google Doc where we're gonna, so this is kind of an interactive webinar because that's also something we like to do. And so there will be polls through Zoom, but there will also be a couple of prompts where we're hoping that you'll interact with us on that Google Doc, and more about that as we move forward. We just want to also point out the certificate in open education for librarians that is offered through Library Juice. Colleen and I and other instructors help to support that that certificate, and we would love to see you there as a part of our learning community. So first, we'd love to get to know kind of what your knowledge level is and where everybody's coming at this topic from. So if you wouldn't mind participating in our Zoom poll. So we're looking for your level of knowledge about textbook affordability and or interest in it. If you would go ahead and vote for us. Okay, so it actually looks like we have a pretty even split. A lot of people who can speak to the basics, which is great. Oh, I love the people who are like, this is now my job and I don't know anything about it. I have been there. Um, and some folks have awareness. So this is good. We have a good mix, which this will hopefully will speak to every one of those needs or every one of those pieces of interest.
Yeah, so our agenda is also our objectives for the session. So we'll get started by conceptualizing what we mean by the impasse in the US, at least for the textbook market and higher ed. We will examine the impacts of this impasse of the traditional textbook model on student learning and resilience. And we'll also identify opportunities and strategies for libraries to influence our institutions toward viable solutions. And this really is our proposition in this webinar, is that libraries already have the skills and domains needed to lead, which can include vision and operations and strategy into this kind of next era of textbook affordability work. And that we can do this because our roles have changed and we've evolved over time. So we have unique skills and lenses that are appropriate to this task particularly. So for our second poll, we want to get a sense of folks in the room. What role does your library already play in course material delivery? So you can select multiple, and please do go ahead and focus on the ones you're actually doing, and we'll save the goals for later. Course reserves, supplemental resources, purchasing or licensing ebooks, running an OER program, serving on a committee, collaborating with the bookstore, or advocacy writ large.
And if you're somebody who's like, I don't do any of these things yet, that's okay too. It might be that you're not working at an institution that's doing this work, or you may not be at an institution. That's great. You'll still learn some things.
Lots of course reserves, some supplemental resources, more than half purchasing ebooks or licensing, almost half running an OER program, same number for college committees, only about a third collaborating with the bookstore. That's an interesting point. And then 2/3 of you are advocates, which makes a lot of sense. So yeah, we're in good company, and I don't know, I would say that this is maybe more advanced. I wouldn't know what representative means writ large for the country, but potentially a more advanced group based on those. So that's awesome. Please contribute your knowledge in the chat as we go. So we'll get started by just conceptualizing what it is that we mean when we say impasse. For about 20 years, student advocates have been working on what's generally termed as the textbook affordability crisis. And framing things as a crisis does direct focus towards the victims of the crisis, which are students, but it doesn't necessarily do the greatest job of implicating the systems that generate this condition. Crises sound kind of unplanned, kind of like accidents, even if we know that they're products of systems that require an intervention to solve. So this is a screenshot from Google's Ngram, which of course focuses on Google Books, leaving out most of the internet. So I would imagine we can safely infer that these numbers would be even higher. But looking at the timeline, so this first line is when the term college affordability really took off. That would be about 1990 is when we started to see a sharp increase in that issue. This second line here that actually perks up in the 70s is textbook crisis, interestingly, and it doesn't fluctuate too much over time, but it spikes in accordance with this third line, which is textbook affordability, which really comes onto the scene in 2005 and gets stronger to today. So I think that that's an interesting lens just to think about partially the prevalence of this issue, but especially the language used, because that expresses how we're thinking about it. And why impasse? Well, impasse is a predicament affording no obvious escape, and that feels familiar to me. A deadlock, a situation in which progress is impossible. We're going to argue against that piece a little bit, especially because the people involved cannot agree. I think that people involved and agreement is a big piece of impasse that works for us versus crisis. I also like the language of a large-scale cooperation dilemma to think about the textbook affordability impasse, because we have a lot of stakeholders at the table here. And what we want to focus on is the stakeholders and systems, which are just relationship between the stakeholders towards moving towards goals that we have in common, which is to keep the business of teaching and learning alive and well, and improving and focusing on student needs. So this is a situation that's developed over time due to the actions of the people in it. So how do we work together for the duration to improve the conditions for students? Quote that I love from Oregon statewide, excuse my dog, Oregon statewide OER program director Amy Hoffer, is that the current model that we have isn't actually working for anyone. So the bad news is that everyone's suffering, but I think that you could also reframe that as good news maybe, because everybody is incentivized to at least change. So let's take a look at our stakeholders real quick. Interrupting the doom loop of the textbook impasse. Students can't afford their course materials. Faculty receive aggressive publisher marketing, but variable institutional support to off-ramp into OER and textbook affordability. Libraries face pressure to prove relevance and evolve into new roles that many have been working on for years and are still in often cases brand new thinking. Admins having to put a lot of capacity towards problem solving all of the access and retention issues that we face that are caused largely by affordability. Our independent bookstores are being outsourced. I feel really lucky to still be at an institution with an independent store, and that's a very intentional and safeguarded choice. Third party or outsourced bookstores in many cases just aren't making enough money anymore in this broken system to stick with the contracts that they've made. And finally, the publishers are offering new revenue model solutions, such as inclusive access, which have drawn national regulatory attention and negative feedback from both educators and students, because these programs are limiting students' choice and ability to control costs. And I will just put a word in there. As you probably know, we intended to offer this webinar a year ago. And that was when the regulatory attention had shifted under the Biden administration towards inclusive access, which is an industry solution. They were looking at regulating that under the banner of junk fees, which I think says a lot about the nature of the model, but also, as we know, the administration and its priorities towards education have shifted. So whether or not that regulatory attention piece still goes forward is to be seen, but it's important to note that that's a piece of it. So now we'd like to pivot into that shared doc, the bit.ly link that we put into chat. And we want to know, what are students telling you? What are you hearing about the cost of textbooks? There have been multiple occasions, as a quote from this slide, when I've had to choose between paying for a textbook or buying groceries. I think we see students making really painful decisions between basic needs and what could be framed as basic needs for college success at the point of sale in our campus stores. Another quote is, often in STEM courses, I couldn't afford the books, which led me to not pursue my original major. So some really drastic reactions, not just cost avoidance by picking classes for cost, but even so far as changing majors. So as we are looking in this doc, so this is meant to be a participation tool. We have a lot of folks, and chat waterfalls are fun, but can disappear and be less engaging. So if you would, we're here in prompt 1. Follow the anonymous hippo, wolverine, walrus, mink, and manatee, if you will, and add some prompts. What are you hearing from students? I only used it once. I don't have money for books till week 4. Do I prefer heat or textbooks? Can I keep the reserve copy? Oh, I love this one. I felt I've been lied to by my faculty. I think that there's a breach in trust, and Quill will cover this a lot in the resilience section that comes when our course materials behaviors are so unpredictable and unreliable in this way. Couple more moments here. You will all retain access to this doc too, so please keep adding to it while we go. But so you might be familiar with the kind of infamous Florida virtual campus survey, which was also repeated in Virginia, had over 6,000 student responses. And in that large sample size, we saw 98% of respondents, 98% of students making attempts to reduce their textbook costs. So it's one of the few things we can say is universal to the student experience, and finding ways around it so that they can stay with us and succeed in their goals.
Okay, so I'm here in Washington State, and this video that is going to play in just a moment is of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in 1940 when it was collapsing. And if anybody here works with engineers, you'll know this story because it's a classic one of when the engineers did not consider the environment, meaning the wind, when they built this bridge. And so from the day it opened, it did this kind of rocking in the wind thing, and then eventually came down in 1940. And I'm using it here to kind of illustrate not just that the system we have right now isn't working, but that we have a lesson to learn from a bridge like this, in that people continued to use it. Like, you can see a car on it. They knew this bridge was going to come down, and people continued to drive over it. And the reason why we have good pictures of it is because they reported that it was, I mean, like, the news crews knew, they were out there recording it because they knew it was going to collapse. People kept using it because it was the only way. It wasn't the only way. There was a ferry too, but they closed it when they opened this bridge. But it was the most expedient way to get across this strip of the Puget Sound that saved people like an hour round trip or something longer than that. I can't remember. But the lesson for us is that people will use a broken system or a dangerous system if they don't have an alternative. And that's where we are with the textbook impasse right now. It's not a crisis. People can get across the bridge. Like, remember, when this bridge fell, no humans died, right? There was property damage at quite a bit of it. The state was out a lot of money, but people lived because they knew they were in dangerous territory and they dealt with it accordingly. But our current system, as you just learned, isn't working for anyone, but we're invested in it. We are incredibly invested in it as institutions. And because we've been told we need it in a variety of different ways. We need publishers, we need textbooks. But the reason why this system continues to work is because of student resilience, because students keep finding the money to support this system, because we tell them they have to, meaning the educational institutions they work through. So the students are taking a huge risk in this system. And I think it's important, as we think about the textbook impasse, to think about how much it is not student centered. So we're going to go ahead and talk to the next slide a little bit. The impasse isn't student centered. So what I'm asking is, in the Google Doc, again, if you wouldn't mind joining us in the Google Doc, which and responding to prompt number 2, which, thank you, Amy, for writing it for us. What does it mean to be a student centered department as a library? And you can include anything. Don't just think about textbooks, because part of resilience is working within existing systems to find support structures. So how is your department student-centered? What are you doing around student-centeredness? Listening to students. I love that line about setting aside information privilege. Thank you. Yes. Equity. Throughout this talk, you're going to hear us use the term cost. And I have shifted to using the term cost to hide some of our equity work. Not my institution is still moving forward in terms of talking about being an anti-racist institution, but there are things that we need to do now to kind of protect ourselves and being able to continue to do the work that we care about. And I'll say more about that in a future slide. Sophie, do we still have a hand up? I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
No,
Okay,
so not
we're good.
anymore. Just remember,
Okay.
folks, there's the Q&A. So if there's something you want us to come back to, go ahead and put that there and we will get to it.
Um, conducting assessments. So these are all really great things that are student centered, and they're initiatives to help drive student need, or to respond to student need and student want, including students, being transparent. This is all really lovely. So just in it to also talk about this, we've openly licensed these slides, or this document. You're free to make copies of it at the end of this presentation so that you have these talking points. Some of them may be ideas you can use, proudly borrow for your own institution, and some of them maybe things that you can use to advocate in your own professional practice. Colleen, do you want to highlight any of these? Because I saw you highlighting some of them.
I want to highlight all of them. I think we have folks working in different types of institutions and positions, and I just think it's a good reflective practice to really look at where our decision-making data comes from. You know, we say we want to be evidence-based and data-driven and student-centered, and so just even like articulating these things to myself and within my team, and then weaving them into our institutional documentation, like strategic plans, program review, like all of that is part of just making it the DNA of what we do. And I work at a community college, and so our mission is very much student and teaching centered. So, you know, these are going to look different at the different types of institutions folks are in.
This is true. Okay, so
thanks
if
for
we,
participating.
yes, thank you for your participation, and we're gonna shift now to talk about resilience, because I think the reason why students are able to complete college is resilience. So textbooks affect student resilience in a variety of ways, and I want to talk a little bit about them. So let's start by trying to define what resilience is, which I've made a study of it. Resilience is this amorphous thing that is basically the ability to respond to challenges with problem solving so that we can overcome them. That's basically what resilience looks like. And I truly love this sign because they have identified that the system that most people rely on in order to get to whatever this thing's trying to take them to doesn't work, right? GPS, sat nav is not working to get people to where they need to go. So the city or the organization that this represents put up signs and said follow our signs instead, because we know people keep getting lost. And they're trying to give people a way of coping when systems conflict. This is actually something we do a lot in colleges, right? We do a lot of, we know your textbooks are too expensive, so we put reserves. We created reserves. Or we know that you have homework, but that, you know, your roommate's making a lot of noise in your room, or that you have work and you can't get it done on time. So we're giving you a late work policy, right? We give a lot of workarounds within the system that we try to signpost. And my question is, why are we trying to make signs that drive people around a system that doesn't work, but we have the power to change? We have the power to change this. We don't need signs. We can fix the system. So that's what my work is dedicated to, is trying to find ways to fix the systems. So let's talk about, I want to get deeper into the definition of resilience. So resilience is studied in a variety of fields, and they have conflicting definitions or ways that it's made up. These are my favorite 4 things that contribute to resilience, and they are cultural strengths, social systems, personality, and that's the study of psychology and basically character traits. So positive psychology feeds in with that. And then institutional, and I'm choosing institutional. I'm using the word here within the college framework because we're talking about resilience of college students, but this could be like your government institutions and how they recognize and support you as a human being. So these are all things that feed into people's resilience. And my core question is, how are textbooks impacting students' resilience? And there's a variety of ways they are, right? Like, it might be that the institutional cost, the money to buy textbooks isn't a challenge, but it could be the content of the textbooks themselves, right? It could be things like the cost for you as a student could be that you're not reflected in the materials, or that your culture is not recognized in some way, shape, or form, or it's belittled even in some textbooks. So part of when I remember I said I was going to talk about cost a little bit. I'm going to reframe that concept of cost. Cost can be the cost of having to overlook the stories that aren't told in your textbooks, or it can be the cost of finding things unreadable, right? How many textbooks are out there that are just not readable for some students? Or it could be trying to do all your homework in the first 2 weeks of the term, because that's when you have access to the free publisher resource, and then you can't buy your textbook, your online homework system anymore. There are a variety of different ways we can define cost for the student. So as we're thinking through those 4 areas, and I think I just talked through the next slide, but that's okay, because that's how I do things. When I think about resilience, I think about it as kind of a budget, right? Like, people have it, resilience isn't finite, but it can be spent, right? And at any given time, you could be giving a lot of resilience to other things. You could be using all of your resilience up on healthcare, right? Or you could be using all of your resilience up on getting through finals week, or you could be using all of your resilience on, going to work that week, depending on your life situations. So we really need to stop and consider, what are the costs that are affecting students' abilities to learn and persist, and how are our educational systems adding to resilience budgets instead of taking away from them? And I love that question, because previously, when you were all talking about the things that you do to be student-centered libraries, are things that can add to people's resilience budgets. You can help people grow, or have resilience, or need less resilience to get through their educational experience, which is honestly what I hope for everybody. That's what, to me, liberation looks like, is people needing to use less resilience to do the things they need to get done. Sometimes that's not always possible. So if I go to the next slide, this is a picture from the New York City Department of Transportation. And they commissioned people to do murals on things that are boundaries to navigating around the city. And it makes me laugh, because sometimes we can't change the barrier, so we beautify the barrier. And it's usually not effective. Sometimes it's effective. Maybe this barrier is actually very intentional and needed because it's keeping pedestrians safe, right? And so then we prettify it so it's less obvious, or it becomes a better part of our city infrastructure or our institutional infrastructure. We should still try to fix the underlying system, and how that underlying system can affect the people who are trying to navigate around the spaces that we work in. So it's important to think about that. And so now you've had a little bit of a definition of what resilience is, and how it might be affecting your students. I can't identify what it is for all of your students, but if you wouldn't mind participating in our poll now, how does the current textbook system at your institution, in its current iteration, affect student resilience? What do you think students are experiencing in terms of resilience? Around textbooks, not the whole thing, because there's other places where they have to use their resilience.
This is also a poll where there's a lot of potential answers that we didn't capture here, so you're also welcome to put those in chat.
So while we're working through this, I feel like I've given you a bunch of doom and gloom, but I think that there again are high points, right? Yeah, there's the note there that some students are sharing textbooks. I have a note about that later. Yes, over 70% of people said they lack data, and me too, right? Like we think we have it, and then the goalpost moves on me, right? Like I was surprised yesterday we were looking at some data and I was like, I did not know that that particular program had textbooks that were so expensive. That's an interesting comment, Nancy, about about inclusive access being a beautification of a barrier rather than a fixing of the barrier. You are correct. And it's a good point that sometimes getting the data is difficult. It is very hard to get a sense because there's so many confounding variables in what affects student success and resilience. My advice for folks who are noting that, I'm seeing it in the chat and I notice in this 70% number, I think one of the things you can do are look for other things around, like things that might surround the textbook data. And I realize that like institutional departments have a difficult time sometimes pulling data, but look at things like how much is your reserves collection circulating, right? And how many of those are textbooks that you've got on reserve because you're trying to deal with the textbook cost? And I would also say if you can partner with student groups, they can sometimes ask questions that you're not able to ask. So at Pierce, the college I work for is Pierce College in Washington State. We're asking students to run a textbook affordability campaign where they're asking, what are you spending your money on each term? Because they can ask and I can't, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit more. Thank you for your response. In the Google Doc, we are asking another prompt, which is what does a student-centered textbook, what does it mean to be student-centered about textbooks? What are some thoughts you have about that? Thank you, folks.
And I welcome you to take as many lenses as could fit in this. Like I think of it from like OER authorship or OER curation from a faculty perspective. That would be like cultural representation and inclusion. Could think of it from a format perspective. I'm seeing a cultural one I really like, getting faculty to think no cost first. So how to build an institutional culture that is just, we could say poverty informed. That would maybe be a gold standard, but at least to consider. Cost as a variable, because historically that's not always been the case at every institution. And I think that's also an expectation around students, or like who do your administrators, do your faculty, do you picture when you picture our students, and is that a holistic, inclusive picture?
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it is tying textbook affordability to other initiatives that maybe affordability isn't the way to talk about it, right? So my college has a really strong Running Start program, which is high school students taking college classes for high school and college credit. They're dual enrollment programs. Those students may not necessarily need textbook affordability, but it is one way that we can market to those students and to their parents. So that is a great way for us to think about how to move textbook affordability forward at our institution in a way that embraces something the college cares a lot about, right? It's finding those elements within your mission. Students should definitely know the cost of course materials before they register for a class. Thank you for noticing that one. That is very important.
Yeah, I think I can identify who the anonymous coyote is in terms of labeling classes in the schedule. We in Oregon, and this will vary per state, we have a legislation stating that all of the cost of our course materials need to be, well, I guess 75% of courses, not all of them, need to be visible in the schedule on day one of registration. And that's an example of Oregon, at least, having a legislature that has some really student-friendly systemic change that then, by way of being mandatory, helps the advocates, the OER advocates at your institution leverage those compliance-based measures and get some of the work done. And it
That's
shows up in like banal places. Oh, schedule designations. Like that's not what we always think of first when we think of OER, affordability, student centrism, but those are all important pieces.
yeah. There's a note there about accessibility and resources being created using universal design. And I think that's a very important one, especially because so many of our institutions, depending on what happens with regulation, but we're very focused on digital accessibility right now. And publishers are too, but look for their claims. And also, like, one of the things we can be doing from an information resources perspective is advocating for the people who are selecting our textbooks, who in my case are often faculty, are always faculty, asking them to ask tough questions about what digital accessibility means to a publisher, because there are publishers who will claim digital accessibility, but they're not the ones who are liable if something is not digitally accessible, and they're not the people who have to fix it. So this is another one that I would be aware of.
Wow. These are really great answers. Thank you. We're going to move into our next segment, though, because we want to make sure to get to that. Well, what can we do? And I know you all are clearly carrying a lot of actions you're already taking and ideas for more. So let's dig into that piece. We hope the framing of impasse and resilience is a useful way to move forward into solutions. One thing I really like about, this slide image of building new infrastructure is it's different ways to get to the same place. And that's that universal design piece that we just saw in the document. So like, how do we apply the universal design lens now to systems and what we do? So really quick, this webinar is focused on course material selection. That's what we promised, and that's what we're going to do. But I want to quickly just do a high-level bird's eye view of existing library expertise and infrastructure, because you could take any one of these big buckets or lenses towards what we do in libraries and retool and apply that to the goals of systemic textbook affordability change, right? We build relationships and have connections. And in a siloed organization, which even at my little institution is a reality, like that is a superpower for leading systemic change. Having institutional knowledge on both the faculty academic side of house through liaison work and course materials and research needs, as well as the student services side of house, is a wonderful way to build connections and share institutional knowledge in different spaces. Of course, we build collections. That's probably the most obvious connection to draw with our course reserves, with licensing ebooks and promoting those as course materials solutions, as providing copyright expertise and helping people use their fair use rights, and running OER programs and promoting those pieces. We have really strong knowledge of student needs. We can help faculty see how students experience information in different contexts and help them reframe, if and when you find this as being part of faculty discourse, that it's not that students aren't reading because they're lazy or don't do the homework or don't read anymore, but what do they actually want to read? What materials challenge and engage and inspire them? We see that at the desk and in our instruction and in our work. We have skills in human-centered info design. And what we mean by that is just the intersection of people with information, which is instructional design, which is selection of course materials work. What do students want to read and in what formats? We can help assist the folks who are in decision-making spaces with those contexts that are super important. And we'll go into information literacy next, because that is kind of the banner of this slide and our proposition, or of this webinar. And our proposition is essentially Helping faculty develop criteria for course material selection is information literacy work, as is the work of informing administrators and operations and system folks of how to work with textbook materials and industry and third-party partners. It's information literacy work that we already do, but just thinking about it through a different lens. And all of this is change management, and change is hard and change is slow, and we work in bureaucracies. But that is kind of the work, and it's chipping away at it, and it's making the inroads that you can. There's change within the library about like, what is the scope of our work? What are our priorities? What are our policies? And outside of the library in terms of what other departments and leadership come to expect from the library and where you see your role as advocating for students within the institution. So a lot of this reapplication or repurposing of all that we do into the domain of textbook affordability isn't a radical idea. It's simply one that takes persistent, constant work. And we do this, like library instruction is a job that we grew into over time. So let's go there. Let's drill into kind of one of these domains, into information literacy, and look at how course material selection can be thought of as information literacy work. Same train, new tracks. How do we reapply this? So the first track, the Quill cover, that's what about applying information literacy at the institutional level? What does that look like for textbook procurement systems at the college writ large? And then second, I'll go into, well, what happens if we apply information literacy work to course material selection?
So we talked a lot about why the system isn't working. And I think one of the places where we need to have some recognition is that the missions don't align between what colleges are trying to do and what publishers are trying to do. And because the goals are different, right? Colleges, by and large, their missions are tied to educated citizens being able to get. In my institution's place, we're always looking for economically viable jobs. I work at a community college, but even if you work for a research institution, the goal at every educational institution is better informed citizens, better informed students who are able to participate in our social systems more effectively. Publishers may have some of that in the way that they design textbooks, but by and large, they're accountable to shareholders and their goal is to make money. Like they are corporate entities. There is no separating that in most commercial publishers spaces. As much as they care about student learning, they care more about their shareholders because they have to care more about their shareholders. That's the way they're structured. So I want to point out that this misalignment of goals is being managed by faculty largely, right? Most institutions don't have a central office that is making conversations with publishers. They have reps that are showing up at their institutions to sell textbooks to faculty. And that's why the market's broken, because faculty are making a decision on textbooks that students don't get a say in. Right? But there's not a central conversation happening. So our ask is that we insert libraries into the middle of this conversation. And the reason to insert libraries, our missions are more closely aligned with helping students and our patrons become lifelong learners, being able to use information effectively throughout their lifetimes, and unfettered access to information, but we deal in both of these worlds. We deal with publishers because we build our collections through publishers. We know how to talk to them. We do have centralized spaces where we make decisions about electronic resources, for example, and we're used to having conversations with those big publishers. They need us as much as we need them, and we know that. And we are members of the college, so we are more closely aligned with what our college missions and goals are. We're here for the students, but we deal in both of these spaces. So as part of the conversation with the institution about how to become a member of the conversations about textbook affordability, one of your key spaces is we have people who talk to publishers regularly. most faculty don't, right? Most individual faculty departments deal with one rep, maybe two reps, to make decisions about what their textbook choices are going to be.
So let's kind of, let's poll again. Have you ever talked with a teacher, professor, instructor, whatever your language is, about why they choose the textbook they use? This has been a fascinating part of growing in my open ed journey, is to recognize where there's just gaps in training and systematic thinking at this entry point into a really impactful system on student success. I hear a lot of stories about it's what my mentor wrote, or it's what my professor wrote or used, or it was recommended, ones that are like accreditation and programmatic standards aligned are a little bit different in this case, but writ large, I just hear a lot of personal stories.
Yeah, a lot of personal preference. Or at one point I asked a teacher this question in a panel in front of other people, and they said, in fact, it was in front of librarians, and they said, well, I have my criteria for evaluating materials, but I don't want to talk about it. Like, I'm not sure why they didn't want to talk about it, but it was interesting to have somebody be like, I have criteria, but I don't think anybody else needs to know what those are. Um,
Sometimes they don't choose, adjuncts
yeah,
coming in, or given a shell or a departmental culture that's very
yeah,
much wanting to be in alignment on what they teach with. So there's a strong suggestion that if you want to get courses, you will teach with this thing.
yes. I would say that one of my goals at my current institution is to get to a place that when we do hire part-time faculty, the first thing that they're given is an option of an open resource that was designed by our faculty. So they at least know, like, they don't have to choose it because we let faculty choose whatever they want to teach with, but they're given an option for, here's a class that's ready to go, it's turnkey and it's openly licensed. And your students don't pay for textbooks.
These results are awesome. 20% do it all the time. Quarter of us a few times, 10% done it once, and then about half saying never. And I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. But to me, it seems like an opportunity through liaison work, through collection development work, through whatever area your job falls in the library. I wonder if this is a feasible way into this work.
Another thing that I would say about this conversation too is that when we started the Open Education Project at Tacoma Community College, where I was before I came here, one of my goals was that the students at that institution would be able to ask any faculty member why they chose the textbook they chose, and the faculty would have a good answer for it. Because I think that's the bottom line. I think every teacher should have to explain to their students why they're using the textbooks they're using and why they believe it's good for their learning experiences.
Yeah, so keeping an eye on time, I want to make sure we get to questions. So the second piece of this proposition that repurposing information literacy on 2 levels is a way forward, using something we already do, is information literacy as faculty learning, and that would be towards course material selection. And what do we mean by this? We mean simply that if many faculty are making decisions based on implicit criteria, precedent that's set elsewhere, a million different reasons, institutional benchmarks, is there an opportunity within our existing information literacy programs, which tend to focus on teaching students and subject area courses, to create an ancillary program that has faculty as our learner audience in terms of navigating textbook offerings and the criterias that we can develop as we navigate all of these offering and options to make our selections in a way that truly aligns with our values and student needs. And I know that folks do these as one-offs, as workshops, as maybe during new faculty orientations, but I'm really interested in, is there potential for this to be a sustained, scalable program? And what's hyperlinked in this slide and something I want to share is a checklist created by Open Oregon. So again, I'm in Oregon and that's my statewide program, and Amy Hoffer's the director who's in the room today and can chime in and share too. This is just a really wonderful checklist that Open Oregon developed that offers big buckets of criteria, like a rubric, right? Using the tools of the trade to then pose great questions that faculty and that librarians can assist faculty in thinking through. Of course, cost is a factor. And as Quill mentioned, cost might be a cover term going forward for some of the other things that we mean when we're talking about equity and inclusion, given that we don't want ourselves, our students, and our programs to become targets. But flexibility, cost, cultural relevance, accessibility, data, privacy, ethical business practice. Does it integrate with campus technology, customer support, practical pieces? So this is a really wonderful resource I share as a benchmark or an example that being open licensed you can draw from or look for others or create your own as a teaching tool that could be collaboratively developed with your faculty and thinking through that. And Amy's saying in chat it was created by a work group spun out of statewide OER steering committee. Yeah. Even just developing a tool, even if it was 4 questions long, I would say in my world would be a win with some departments and moving towards this, because it's more than just I know it's good, and the publisher offers it as a digital ebook with a homework platform. So there are labor issues in there as well with ancillaries and quizzes and test banks, but that'll be another webinar someday. Yeah, so we're getting towards the end because we want to be able to get to questions.
And we did see there is one question in the Q&A, so we'll definitely respond to that one live. So this picture, which I truly love, it's called Idaho Traffic Jam, which cracked me up because I live in a Western state. But I think the point that comes with this is that even if you don't have a textbook affordability system that's clearly outlined at your institution, you have a textbook affordability system and it's a hidden one. People mentioned course reserves. Somebody earlier in the chat talked about students sharing textbooks with each other to cover costs. These are hidden ways that students are addressing textbook affordability and the system. And some of them, like, okay, reserves, that's institutional. But the one where somebody pointed out in a Google Doc, in the Google Doc, that students just agree to pay the fine when they're overdue with reserves. That again is another way that students are coping with a system that doesn't exist. So they're sharing the road with not the same activities, and there is no way to separate and get through safely, right? So then they're just stuck in traffic and they don't understand why everybody else is a cow and they're not, right? Like they don't understand why other people are making a system work, because other people are using their resilience budgets in different ways. And so I just want to say, you may not have an explicit system at your institution. It's a hidden system. It is still happening, and it's something that is not supportive of your students who have are first generation college students or who do not understand the systems that they could be a part of. So this is our, oh, you go first.
I was just going to say, moving towards wrapping up so we can get to questions, just a reminder that we do teach these classes through Library Juice that you can take a la carte, and we have these conversations, especially for the content of this webinar, the libraries as open education and textbook affordability leaders. But that's one way to keep continuing the conversation and maybe even get to the question that's here in chat. Oh, I'm sorry, in the Q&A.
So the question we have in Q&A is, are there institutions that do OER particularly well that can be held up as examples of how OER can work? And thank you for giving us an opportunity to end on a high note, or a higher note.
Yep.
I think there are several. There are lots of them. I particularly like the work that Salt Lake Community College has done around whole departments adopting open materials for their programs. Let's see, I love all the work that's coming out of Open Oregon, honestly.
I look for the state, like the way that I find programs and exemplars that I can draw from is I look to the statewide organization. So I look to Washington. Obviously, I live in Oregon. There's Affordable Learning Georgia. Texas has a robust program. Like I get on listservs. I also, when I attend conferences, I just see names over and over again, and I find people that way. Like Maricopa's got a great system. California, of course, has a really great system. But
Yeah.
institutions, like getting at that level of granularity, what do you think, Quill?
I think I would go, the other place that I go a lot to find out what other folks are doing is CCC OER, which is an advocacy organization. And I think that Heather's with us today. But that particular group does webinars and case studies of organizations and what they're doing. So there's a lot of folks in that group who've done zero textbook cost degree programs. Oh yeah, thank you, Carrie. There's a lot of good organizations that are doing work in different ways. I would say that it's always contextual. Like your institution is going to direct how well your program works. You can use other people's ideas, but I have yet to find the OER program that cookie cutters into every institution. It just, because everybody's a little bit different, so everybody has to take a slightly different approach. But there are initiatives that work for everybody. So I don't know, faculty grants to adopt OER. That's a program that I think has worked really well at every institution I've seen it put in at. Trying to think of other big initiatives. Trying to get things into your tenure process is really great. Like that has had a lot of effect at Pierce, where people can claim OER work in their tenure and retention processes. And that's a policy change. It didn't cost the institution any money at all to do that, but it has changed things for our student affordability.
Getting it into our faculty contracts, sometimes in the intellectual property clause or article, so that faculty can be incentivized to do OER work, create OER courses, syllabi, materials, even texts, whatever level they want to work at, when they can share that intellectual property right, those copyrights with the institution. Because most of us, I would assume, are working on works for hire contracts where, like, if I make this awesome OER on college money, it is not my intellectual property. So getting it into the faculty contracts that in those instances you can share it. That's a big win that helps leverage things at the systemic level. Of pivoting away from exemplar institutions and into exemplary or high impact practices or interventions. Oh,
Yeah.
doers, yeah.
That's a good one too. There are a lot of organizations, and there are some on that on the Google Doc that we shared, some of the research that we did to start this, but also some organizations that you might look into. We'll add to that. We just ran out of time because that's what we do.
That's what we do.
We work up to the last minute, but I'll work to add some more institutions to that document by the end of today so people can make a copy of it and have some of those resources. We're right on the
Thanks so
hour.
much for joining us, everybody. It's been great to have you.